Yeah, let's do it.
All right, welcome everyone to our weekly meeting for container security. It feels like it's more like monthly or even every other month sometimes, the frequency that we've been recording lately. But welcome anyway. And let's see, I don't quite have the agenda pulled up yet.
Have it. There are no follow-up issues, demos, or issues for playing Breakdown. There's only in other discussions, Tiago, Sam, and Neil to discuss cross-functional prioritization and planning.
All right.
Neil is on the working group, I believe, so he can inform us all of that goodness.
And I think you're allowed to stay, Alexander.
You should definitely stay, Alexander.
You're not in the invitation, but you know.
I was trying to find the best place to schedule this. We're doing one for Threat Insights. Threat Insights is kind of piloting this more heavily than other groups, but it'll be important for other groups, especially since we're so closely aligned with container security. Sorry, I was just thrown off because my URL is all messed up. I just fixed that. But yeah, so the initiative here is that teams will start to review data around work type distribution with a guideline that teams are looking toward. A 60% of the work is feature work, 30% is maintenance type work, and then the remaining 10% would be bugs. There's kind of a healthy distribution of work, with the understanding that not every team is going to be able to get close to those numbers initially or ever, you know, some circumstances. So that's part of it. So we could kind of start there and look at the dashboard page. The other part of this is the actual planning effort. So having organized backlogs that have feature work, maintenance work, and bug work ready to be pulled in, so that our PM, you know, Sam in this case, can have an effective menu of things to pull into and you know, maybe get to those ratios. So let's look at the metrics first. I think that would be cool.
Yeah, I'm curious to see those. Where?
So I'm sharing my screen now. They're on everybody's handbook page. So every group has gone through the effort. I think I did the container security one, definitely did Threat Insights. It was a quick snippet. It's a one-liner that we're adding to our handbook pages, which gives us two new dashboards. One is this backlog view, which is, we're not going to look at this right now, but it tracks like open bugs or incident issues. So you can kind of see those trends. The focus for this prioritization effort would be looking at our merge request data. And so this is a work in progress, in my opinion, because it's a little bit hard to read, but we have a couple main emphases. One is emphases. One is our goal is that we have close to zero. The real goal is less than 5% of our MRs are not typed. So we have that, the type label is maintenance, feature, or bug, and then there's subtypes as well. But it's just making sure that every MR that gets pushed through, in container security's case, you know, has a type. It's expected that some things will slip through and they just don't have the right categorization. That's fine. That's where that less than 5% is our goal for now. So that'd be first thing to look at is how are we doing? We're less than 5, so that's fine. We can totally continue on. If we wanted to find out more about this, there are these two tables. This first one will show us. So if I hover over this, this is only for the current month. So it's since June 1st. So it's only 2 weeks worth of data. If you want more historically, you can look here. But this will show us those MRs that don't have a type label. So we can definitely go through and categorize these. I think as a value of iterating, we shouldn't probably go back too far and adjust these, but we can absolutely go back and correct ones like this June 3rd and the last couple in May. By all means, we probably should leave these April ones alone, but for the more recent ones, we can jump in there and figure out what the correct type label is. What I've been doing is just adding the correct type label and then pinging the author of the team and just saying, hey, I added this thing just as a reminder, just a gentle nudge. So that and then we also have automation in place so that if an issue or an MR progress too far without having a type label, then the bot will come in and ping the author. So then secondly, thinking about the distribution, thinking about how this reflects, does this match the current goals of the team? So we have a pretty much even split between maintenance and features, 17% bugs, and just kind of a conversation around how does that feel? If it feels off, why might that be? If it feels good, then there's not much more to talk about, actually. That's the direction. I always, actually, it's right now. This handbook page is driving me crazy. I actually got it on the first try because my history isn't capturing this for some reason. But so to assist in all this, we have a lot of new handbook updates. And so kind of what I described, actually not the data review, but the prioritization is described here. And then there's a whole nother page that talks about the data review. I apologize for bouncing around a little bit. Shoot. It's probably shows that we don't have the page links all correct right now. If it's hard to find these, there's a sibling page of this that describes the data review and kind of the cadence that we'll be taking. So it's expected that team or groups will be doing this on a monthly basis. You know, post milestone, we'll review and kind of high level do that assessment that I mentioned. And then there's a more in-depth review every quarter where the team, including their leadership group, will be reviewing this. And there's also going to be a VP level review as well. It's just to make sure teams have the right amount of support and everybody understands the reasons, you know, behind where the team is tracking. What questions came up while I was talking about all that? And then, because I have a whole second section to jump into.
Yeah, I don't really have any questions.
Jump back to here.
From my perspective, it's looking pretty good. We actually were doing something very similar. We've been doing something very similar to this for a long time now. Maybe it hasn't been as data driven as this, but at least we've been trying to track to like 10 to 15% of our total time spent on bugs, with the rest allocated to maintenance and feature work. So it looks like we're actually doing pretty good in that regard, or at least tracking pretty close, especially recently. So I feel pretty comfortable where this is at right now. I don't really know how are we, my only question here would be like, how are we defining the split out between maintenance and feature work? Does this get categorized as maintenance if it already exists and we're like adjusting it, or?
Yeah, so feature work is anything that impacts the user experience. So any UI changes fall into feature work, any like type of workflow, anything that would directly impact how our users are using or consuming the information. So even a text change would be a feature. Maintenance work is behind the scenes, you know, code cleanup, refactoring, fixing a bug that doesn't directly impact the user experience might be classified as maintenance. Oh, I'm sorry, I said bug. Fixing a behavior that wouldn't directly impact the user experience might be classified as maintenance. Or if it's noted as a bug and it's impacting the user experience, it has a priority and severity, you know, that would be a bug.
That almost
There is a page.
sounds
Yeah, go ahead and I'll find that other reference. There we go. So this engineering metrics work type classification section describes the high level categories, bug feature maintenance, and then there's subcategories within.
Yeah, the way
And this is pre-existing. This has been updated recently, but it's not directly aligned with this initiative.
got it. Yeah, the way
Go
you're,
ahead, Sam.
can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
Sure, okay.
Yeah, we can hear you.
The way you're describing it almost sounds like front end and back end, but I'm wondering if, because a lot of times we'll do a feature and we'll release an MVC, and then we'll do a bunch of follow-on improvements to that feature. And those really are improvements. I'm wondering if some of our, and we could answer this, I guess, by going back and looking at the individual MRs, but I wonder if some of those things that really are feature work where they're just like follow-ups to the MVC, but they actually are like feature, probably should be categorized as like feature enhancement would be the subtype there. I wonder if some of those we bucket under maintenance instead. So I don't know. I kind of wonder if we're categorizing things accurately. I guess that was the only thing in this that was surprising to me, is I feel like most of our features are new. And so for the most part, we probably aren't doing a whole lot of maintenance, but from the graph, it sure looks like we are. So then the question becomes, is there just an error in categorization?
I think that's quite possible, Sam, particularly because we weren't, I wasn't anyway, paying too much attention to what I was selecting. Like, it looks right, go for it. But now that we're tracking and we're making an effort to stay on that 60-30-10 ratio, it becomes important to get that right. I'm not too bothered with the past, as long as we show a trend or can explain. If we maintain and then we can explain why, then I'm comfortable.
Yeah, and the other thing to keep in mind with these metrics too is, as I understand it, this is just looking at counts of MRs and it doesn't look at the size of the MR.
Correct.
Which, I don't really know. Again, I don't have like hard data behind this, but I would expect that, some things like some bugs and maintenance tasks are more likely to be really small. In fact, even just today, I opened an MR, a maintenance MR, to update the text on one of our pages. It was a very small change. It was something that I did, and I'm not an engineer, I'm not a developer. Whereas new features tend to be pretty involved and time consuming, where you're going through and actually building things out from scratch. So, I think there's an angle of that too. Like, we have a lot of really small doc updates, and those might be overinflating that maintenance number. But in terms of like actual time spent or actual work done, I feel like we actually tend to spend more time on the new feature work. So I don't know. I'm pretty comfortable with where this is at. I feel like it may not quite accurately represent where we spend our time as a team, but I don't really have any concerns otherwise looking at this.
That's definitely the goal of this conversation, this evaluation, is how does this feel? What are the reasons the data might be different than we expected? And if we can justify that, that's amazing. And I don't think anyone at this stage especially is looking for teams to just shift, their process. It's better just like to have an understanding. That your point about the sizing came up. We had a Ask Me Anything or an AMA session. This is a few weeks ago now, but right after the working group started formalizing some of the direction, we had some AMA scheduled. That was a question I raised. Food for thought was the MR counts are very much dependent on the scale of that work. I love your perspective on the maintenance. You're right. A lot of maintenance items will be a lot quicker than a big feature. I was curious how teams might start to react, if we might see teams starting to break their work down smaller so that we end up with more MRs. It's kind of another indirect contributing factor to the MR rate we might see as
I hope not. I really hope
just
not.
to make the data look better, right?
Exactly. I really hope not, because then the whole thing is like the MR rate itself already bothers me a little bit, because when the metric becomes a goal, it ceases to be a good metric, and this is, I feel, what the MR rate has become to a large extent. Hopefully, we won't be trying to game this ratio. Where we land, if we understand it, and what Sam brought really good points there, we might just make a call, say, yep, that looks right, we're comfortable with it, let's keep rolling.
Yeah, that's exactly how I feel. The last thing I would want is for this to distract the team or, cause us to operate less efficiently. I feel like we're in a really good position right now. I second that.
I need to find the other reference for the metrics review, because there's a really good handbook page that describes the cadence, those sessions that are taking place. I was talking to somebody earlier, and they mentioned that their group is exploring reviewing these metrics as part of their team retrospective, where other groups were more resistant to that because they didn't want to they wanted to keep it more high level. This is something the EM, the PM, quality managers, people like that can talk about and figure out where those behaviors or patterns might be coming from, versus having the direct team members super hyper aware of this and changing their behaviors unintentionally. So that's something we can consider. Let me find that handbook page. I think, and I feel like I did us a disservice because I feel like this might all be linked from the tasks issue that I originally linked up into the agenda. And I'm not sure it is. Oh, yeah, it's right there. Cool. So this page, the cross-functional dashboard reviews, talks about the different sessions, like I mentioned. So each group is expected to do a monthly review. So this would be somewhat, sometime post milestone, looking at the metrics. Like I had mentioned, that pie chart was a monthly view. It's not looking at milestone, and it doesn't overflow either. So it's just like I mentioned, it's only 2 weeks of data right now. So the reliability is suspect at times during the month. But the team is looking at that. The participation, as I mentioned, by default would be the leads of the team, those counterparts that are helping with the planning and prioritization efforts. What are we looking at? It's that 5% assessment of the other ratios. And then additionally, there are 2 quarterly reviews. One would be a sub-department level that's looking at all the groups within that sub-department. And then another quarterly session. I think this one's going to be interesting how this actually comes out, but this would be, Christopher, Eric, I'm trying to remember her name, Mac, and then Christopher's there, David would all be part of that. So that'll be a much broader session. So, and I think there's a cross-functional dashboard for that too, that does a really big roll up of, we were looking at a lot of specific, I'm not going to log into Sisense right now since that's not loading, but the view here is much more high level than the page we were looking at. So if we jump over to the prioritization aspect, there are 2 components to this that the working group has been working to detail. The first is how do we actually conduct issue prioritization? The goal here is that we have DRIs aligned with the different types that we mentioned. So product manager is looking at prioritization for feature, engineering manager is looking at the maintenance bucket, and then quality is looking at our bug types. And so we just have kind of different contexts that we're thinking about, which would be pretty cool. I'll get here in a second. And then there's definitely going to be a lot of collaboration, right? It's not just in discrete, no overlap going on. I think there's going to be a lot of continued collaboration as this goes. And I think that we'll see an evolution as well. In terms of planning, this puts the product person in a really good place to effectively take those prioritized sets of buckets and put them into a plan for each milestone or for the milestone. And so that's described here.
Not how we work in our group, by the way. It's probably worth calling that out. We do handle that.
Yeah. And I don't know, Sam, if you've been involved. I know that this topic was raised in the product group meeting, I think 2 weeks ago. There was definitely a lot of conversation around it. I forget his name again. Justin strongly represented the feedback back to the working group, and we've been talking a lot about it. In some ways, we're trying to slow down some of these changes regarding the DRIs, and in other ways, we're trying to put more direction in place. I think a big goal here is some consistency. Groups are acting the same, but at the same time, feedback, like you just said, it's not how our group works, not how we want to work. So we don't fully support this. That's going to be a big problem if we're trying to standardize.
Yeah.
How can you describe how container security currently works then?
I really see myself as the product manager responsible for priority.
Mhm.
I feel like it's not really necessary for me to get involved in actually planning out each milestone. I've always deferred that to you and to Tiago to actually plan out the milestone and determine which items to put in. So my deliverable has always been that prioritized list for new feature work. And then I also put priority labels on the bugs. But then I rely on the rest of the engineers to choose what they actually work on. Because at the end of the day, like if I'm planning it out, I'm just gonna go dump in the things that are top of my priority list. But that may or may not actually make sense from an engineering perspective. You know, you may have constraints regarding skill sets or availability or blockers. You know, there can be a wide variety of other things that factor into that. And from my position as the product manager, I'm just really not in the best place to be making those judgment calls. So I just always assume that, you know, you're working top down from that priority list, but I leave the actual milestone planning itself up to you and Tiago. And for that, you know, I think we've mostly just relied on our issue boards.
Yeah, Sam, I had just mentioned that on K because I picked up on that as well. I think you could argue both ways for us, and I really like the way we do it for the reasons that you eloquently explained much better than I could. My particular reason for bringing it up is because if whoever's doing that stacking is probably the best person to be responsible for tracking that ratio, right? So if I'm looking at the priorities list and pulling things in and go, cool, I've stacked now 15.2, and then I need to balance that out to go, oh, you know what, there's a lot of maintenance here, I should take a little bit off. That part there, I wanted to see how everybody feel. That's how I feel. Whoever's doing that should be in charge of, hey, am I skewing this?
Yeah, I agree. I'm right there with you, Tiago. I think that's a great approach.
So I kind of skipped. I had a question on Hage about how to track that new. Do you have any advice? I think we might have talked about that before.
Yeah. So I think the cadence of prioritization is just ongoing. So, you know, this prioritization of these buckets is just an ongoing effort. Like we're doing refinement now. It's just kind of a part of our process, as we always have these primed backlogs to pick from. And then as far as a cadence to plan the milestone, it's going to be much more easier if we were to go into that stack session. You know, whoever's doing that can
Yeah,
effectively
so
pick off.
I'm being super practical about this. Like my question is, okay, so if I'm looking at the columns and there's some milestones and I need to drag issues into it, has there been any thoughts or recommendations on how to balance that out? Is there a script that I can run that gives me the count, or should I create a dashboard specifically for that?
Yeah, so let me show you the dashboard we've been experimenting with. We don't want to be prescriptive. Plus, we're just experimenting with this too, and I don't want to push down anything hard and fast to the teams. But
That's fair.
this dashboard is really straightforward. We just have a board that has 3 type columns. That's the only filter applied to these columns, and then it's filtered down to container security. And if you notice, just for simplicity's sake, I have the show labels disabled just so it's a little cleaner to look at, because those labels at this context don't really add any value. What would be fantastic is if these cards had the milestone, so you could see if they are already scheduled work. That would be amazing. We have an issue out to our plan team as a feature request to aid in that. But so the idea here is that independently, so Tiago and I looking at the maintenance column. So we could additionally add like a front end or back end filter and slim this down even further. And that gives us that ability to visually, like you said, kind of move things around. I think container security is interesting. If I go over to Threat Insights, there's a lot of issues. I'm pretty overwhelmed. I'm not sure where to start. This actually seems pretty manageable. So, it's a matter of like rearranging these and saying, I'd like to do this first. I'd like to do this next type of thing. And we're all kind of doing that independently as well. Features in terms of planning the milestone is where it gets interesting. And that's where that indicator would help. But let me just add a milestone indicator to here. And that's kind of a gut check of where we are at. And I'm just going to choose 15.1 since that's in progress. But we can kind of look at what that distribution is looking like for 15.1 is we have 14 feature issues, 3 maintenance issues, and 4 bugs. And then you can also see the cumulative weights as well. So it's decently easy, especially with the show labels hidden. You can kind of see, well, there's a lot more items in the feature column type of thing.
That's cool. So that's 19% bug, 66% feature, and the rest is maintenance. 14% to get the ratio.
Yeah, no, yeah, right. It'd be nice to have a script. It'd be nice to have like a roll up thing.
Yeah, it's not terrible.
But
I forgot that you could filter by milestone. That answers my question.
So while you're thinking about how you might prioritize within this little mini list, there's actually a neat trick that our issues has a manual filter, the order by manual, which actually allows you to drag and drop within the issues list, something I didn't know existed. Somebody was like, hey, you can do this. And so this actually conforms to the same exact ordering. So right now I have it. Why is that? Why is maintenance up? Because I went to the milestone view. There were 26 issues. We should see 26 over here. So it's the same set. And if I rearrange these two, I apologize if I screwed something up by doing that and I refresh, they should mimic the same data set. Don't know how that works. Please don't ask me. But it's really cool. And I think this can be a lot more flexible if you're dealing with large sets of issues that you'd like to rearrange. And then this might be a better consolidated team view.
Cool. We're on top of time.
Working. Sure. Oh yeah. Someone put that back in there. Not me. Okay.
You got an error when you were reordering. I don't know if it.
Yeah.
What do we have next for this? Just jump in and start doing this for 15.2.
Yeah, the data review was a great first session. So as far as that issue tracking, that's step one is the team should start reviewing data. So the assessment that Sam made was fantastic. Yeah, and then looking at this next milestone, which is starting pretty soon, trying to implement some of this. I think my goal is to visit the maintenance column for front end issues and probably work with Alexander and just make sure that they feel ordered enough. Again, I think the problem's much more simplified in container security than over in Threat Insights. There's a lot more going on. So I'm not looking forward to that one. So, and also I'm curious between, since we have 2 managers or engineering managers, what's that relationship look like? How do we coalesce? So we have essentially 4 buckets. So Thiago, you and I can kind of sync on that, I guess. One thing I didn't mention is the bug column. Quality is working on some automation that will auto schedule Seb1 and Seb2 bugs. I don't know exactly what that looks like because we're not going to be able to achieve every single bug, right? Even if it's scheduled. But that's also part of the communication here is that we have a value within the company that I wasn't actually aware of, although I followed it, but the plan ambitiously, or it's okay to overplan and underachieve. That's not a bad thing. And I think that'll definitely take effect for bugs. We're just not going to be able to hit every bug that's prioritized or that's scheduled. Cool.
All right. Well, we're past time. Thanks for surfacing that up today, Neil. I appreciate it.
Yeah, definitely. Everybody else, thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. Bye, friends.